company, I think Rigaku in Japan, had developed a higher power X-ray tube. X-ray tubes, make X-rays by electrons striking an anode and making essentially synchrotron due to the slowing down of electrons in the anode. You want to make more X-rays that way, you increase the electron beam power. But ultimately, you can make an electron beam with several kilowatts, and it would melt the anode. So Rigaku developed the water-cooled rotating anode, and they sold, I think, their first such machine to Bell Laboratories for Peter Eisenberger. A machine in which 60 kilowatts of electron beam power struck a rotating water-cooled anode, making 10 or 50 times more X-rays than stationary anode tubes. So Peter was doing that, and very interested, and then he learned that 1,000,000 times higher, literally a few 100,000 at least, times higher intensity was going to be available at Stanford using the synchrotron radiation. So he came out with others in his group and harnessed this radiation. I worked with them to develop an X-ray program on X-ray absorption spectroscopy, XFS it's called. Extended X-ray absorption fine structure is the acronym for the work that he was doing. So that one of the 5 stations we put on the first beamline came into operation in March '74, was developed by Bell Labs, which to do this XF study. And Peter brought people from Bell Labs, but he also brought Sayers, Lytle, and Stern, the people who had pioneers in XFs, who had worked out the theory of how XFs, the extended X-ray absorption fine structure of an absorption edge, could be used to determine local environment around a specific elemental constituent of a complex material. So, and they got a very bright graduate student, Brian Kincaid, who was working with Seb Doniak at the time, and Seb moved him over to work with Peter. I got involved with them, and really my first, I'm not an X-ray physicist, but I understand that if you have more intensity of X-rays, you could do more. So XFs is a technique which determines the local environment around a specific elemental constituent. So Peter had the world's most powerful conventional X-ray tube, this rotating anode tube at Bell Labs, made in Japan. And one of the things he did was to just put it in a very thin, pure copper foil to look at the XFs. And he built a monochromator which could scan through the K edge of copper, about 8 kilovolts, I think. And as you tuned through it, you looked at the fine structure above the K absorption edge. And he designed a computer control system which scanned the monochromator through the K edge in 1 or 2 electron volt increments through the absorption edge and then above, cutting off this very thin copper foil. But in order to go through a couple of hundred volts or so above the K edge, using the intensities available from the world's most intense conventional X-ray source, it took him 10 days of round-the-clock operation in which he got a very ragged spectrum showing jump in absorption as you hit the edge, and then the extended structure extended above the edge. These little ripples that occur above the edge, and from which you could determine the structure of the material that produced these ripples. You took the same foil, which took 10 days to get this data, to Stanford, to the Stanford Synchrotron Radiation Project, in which we designed a station with only 1 milliradian of horizontal synchrotron radiation, no focusing. Brian Kincaid built a spectrometer, a micrometer that could scan through this thing and computer control system, and put this foil in, and in 20 minutes he got an XF spectrum which had 10 times better signal to noise, meaning 100 times greater signal than he could get with his water-cooled X-ray tube at Bell Labs.
It's amazing.
And that really made such a deep impression on me that I knew that we were onto something. So from that you could calculate that the X-rays we were producing at Stanford parasitically with only a few milliamperes of stored beam was 100,000 times greater than he could get with his water-cooled rotating anode Japanese X-ray tube.
Right.
Now that's gone up another factor of a few 100,000.
Yeah.
So it really has been a revolution. Very rarely do you get a situation where you get an increase in capability and performance measured in hundreds of thousands or a million.
Right.
I like to point out that colliding beam storage rings, if there's an idea to improve the luminosity, the event rate, by a factor of 2, worth a few $1 million to do that. And here we have 10 to the 6th increase. And by the way, so storage rings proliferate around the world. There's more than 50 synchrotron radiation light sources around the world. And we built the first X-ray laser at SLAC, which produced a peak brightness during the pulse, these femtosecond pulses, but during the pulse, it's another factor million higher than the storage rings. So it's been a very interesting ride to go through this process of working with scientists exploiting factors of hundreds of thousands and millions or billions in increased performance.
Yeah. Do you want to tell me how you got, you can tell me more about this if you like. There's probably much more to say there. Do you want to also tell me how you got into Sesame and also into human rights activities?
Oh, okay, sure. Based, I think, largely on the work we were doing at Stanford in the 70s, people around the world began to see publications over the whole spectral range, from ultraviolet or vacuum ultraviolet, soft X-rays, hard X-rays, exploiting these huge factors. And yet, and there were a few other programs, such as in Japan and in Germany, and maybe in the Soviet Union, where similar parasitic secondary programs were built on high-energy physics machines. But particularly in the U.S., the growing interest of people who are dissatisfied with the parasitic secondary nature of the Stanford Synchrotron Radiation Project began demanding that fully dedicated new machines be built. So that reached a high pitch, I think, in 1976 or so. And our government in the U.S. and in Japan and Germany, funding was made available for new storage rings that would be exclusively light sources, no high-energy physics, no colliding beams, just machines in which you would store electron beams to multi-GeV energies and make many beam lines from each of the bending magnets.